Imagine this. You just finished an incredible series. You feel really grateful for how awesome it was, but you just wish there was more. So you wait, and wait, and wait, until finally they announce a sequel, a whole new story, and another chance to see your favorite world again. You're hoping that it'll recapture the magic, or maybe even surpass the original. The first chapter or episode comes out, but something feels off. So you keep going, waiting for that moment where everything clicks and it feels like the show you fell in love with. But that moment never happens. Instead, you slowly start to realize that this is trash. And now, the masterpiece you knew feels different. And you're wondering if the story would have been better if they just left it alone. If you're a fan of anime, or manga, or anything else, you know exactly how much this sucks. But what's the difference between the sequels that actually make a franchise better and the ones that make it way, way worse? When it comes to sequels, there's pretty much no better place to start than with Yu-Gi-Oh! Because it had a lot of them. Yu-Gi-Oh! Was originally about this shy kid called Yugi, who had this ancient necklace that allowed him to turn into some mysterious pharaoh whenever he played cards. You know, basic stuff. The series focused on cool monsters, strategy, discovering the story of an ancient civilization. And even though it was just about cards, it got kind of intense. Plus, it had one of the most banging intro songs of all time. I stand by that statement. When the series was over, it was already considered an absolute classic. But because the anime was attached to a real-life card game, they decided to create sequels. A lot of sequels. Each one had a new main character, a new setting, new game rules. We started with Yu-Gi-Oh! GX first. It was set a few years after the original. People liked it, but generally fans agree that it was kind of meh. But after that, we got another sequel, Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds. This story was set decades later in this futuristic city with one of the most iconic protagonists of the entire series, Yusei Fudo, combined with the most bizarre elements you could think of: card duels on motorcycles. It was way cooler than it sounds, okay? 5Ds is often called the absolute best Yu-Gi-Oh! Series, including the original. People loved it for its mature storyline, high stakes, some of the best arcs in the franchise, and the fact that the characters are not idiots. But then we got hit with Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal, and that's when things started getting a bit weird. People still really loved the sequel, but you could tell something about Yu-Gi-Oh! Was changing. And after that, we got a bunch of sequels. Arc V, V-Rains, Sevens, Go Rush, and each one of these had their own protagonists and new mechanics that changed the entire game. The core idea never really deviates too much, but everything else does. The tone, the style, who they're trying to make the show for. The truth is that those sequels were kind of all over the place. Most people will agree that 5Ds and Zexal are great, but when it comes to all the other ones, there's love, there's hate, but mostly fans think that they're okay. On one hand, constantly pumping out new series kept Yu-Gi-Oh! Relevant and directly helped sell more cards. Each new show brought new ways of playing and made sure it stayed one of the longest running anime of all time. Yu-Gi-Oh!'s legacy is still really strong when you think of the entire franchise, but creatively, it definitely feels like the series reached its peak quite a long time ago. Nowadays, when people think about Yu-Gi-Oh!, they mostly think about an anime that used to be good. Unlike Yu-Gi-Oh!, some other legendary series can be way more lucky with their sequels. When I was a kid, you were either a Pokemon kid or a Yu-Gi-Oh! Kid, or, you know, both of you were rich. This thing is one of the most iconic pieces of culture ever. You could be a child, an adult, a dog. You know it was a banger. For over 25 freaking years, we followed this kid called Ash Ketchum, even though for some weird reason it was called Sasha in French. Anyway, this dude and his electric rat Pikachu just traveled from region to region, doing literally the same stuff over and over. Beating people up to get these badges, escaping a team of criminals who try to steal their stuff, and making friends with literally every human they came across. The show was comforting, beautiful in its simplicity, and it also made an absolute obscene amount of money selling cards and video games to people. Let's go. For generations of fans, Ash was the face of Pokemon. This was a character who somehow managed to stay 10 years old for 2.5 decades while the audience grew up. And after 25 years of this madness, he finally became world champion. The journey was over, but we still have to sell cards and video games, huh?
Well, you're absolutely right.
So they decided to create a a sequel, Pokemon Horizons. The first big difference between the original Pokemon and Horizons was that it ditched Ash for a new main character called Liko. On top of that, they completely changed the format from the usual travel around collecting gym badges to this big adventure focused on solving an ancient mystery. The show put way more emphasis on character development and storytelling instead of the regular gym battles and tournaments we were used to. For a lot of fans, this felt like a fresh start for the whole series. But to some other people, getting rid of Ash, literally one of the most recognizable characters in anime history, was a pretty big risk. And at first, Horizons really struggled. Even though the whole premise sounded pretty cool, the show was missing epic battles and a clear progression system like the gym badges. You know, the things that made Pokemon, Pokemon. But then something happened. The show slowly got better. In its second year, the series finally brought back those strategic Pokemon battles we love. The anime started trending and actually managed to recapture that magic that made the Ash era so good. If you're like me and you stopped watching Pokemon like 100 years ago, you probably had no freaking clue that there was even a sequel to begin with. But trust me when I say that Pokemon Horizons is basically marking a whole new era for this thing. It shows that you can make a sequel that respects what came before while still being bold enough to try new things, making sure Pokemon's legacy doesn't just stick around but actually grows even bigger. Sometimes the sequel is so much better than the original that it becomes one of the best manga of all time. Listen, the idea that there was going to be a video on this channel that doesn't mention JoJo is crazy. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is basically the story that follows the Joestar family as they deal with the most ridiculous supernatural buffoonery you can imagine. We're talking about over 1,000 chapters of threats that span across different eras and continents. But here's where the author absolutely lost his mind. At the end of Part 6, he doesn't just decide to create a new part as usual. No. This madman literally resets the entire story after hundreds of chapters. And that is how we got JoJo's Part 7, Steel Ball Run. We're now in an alternate universe set in 1890s America, and the whole story revolves around this cross-country horse race. Our new JoJo is Johnny Joestar, who starts the story as a paraplegic former jockey. Then you've got his charismatic mentor slash partner, Gyro Zeppeli. The whole vibe is very different. It's less about random fighting and more mature overall. We're talking Western adventure, political intrigue, philosophy. This sequel does this thing where it constantly honors previous JoJo stuff while still doing its own thing. And the main villain is the freaking president of the United States. What more could you possibly want? When this sequel dropped, people immediately knew something was different. It felt like the moment the author, Hirohiko Araki, had finally reached his absolute peak as a creator. Steel Ball Run isn't just praised by JoJo fans, but the entire manga community. And trust me, these animals agree about nothing. We're talking about readers losing their minds over the writing, the character development, the synergy between the protagonist and Araki's artwork. Have you seen it? The success of Steel Ball Run was so overwhelming that it basically guaranteed JoJo could keep going without becoming repetitive or boring. It set up this new continuity that gave us JoJo Lion and now the JoJo Lands, proving that this series has infinite potential as long as Araki keeps doing his thing. More importantly, it forced all the critics and skeptics who used to dismiss JoJo as just some cult classic or meme factory to just shut up. Steel Ball Run is this rare example of a sequel that doesn't just honor its legacy, it takes the series to new creative heights, even after decades of existence. And to this day, it is ranked as the second best manga of all time, behind Berserk. Unfortunately, there are also times where the manga sequel is good, but the anime sequel, not so much. Tokyo Ghoul is basically what happens when someone decides to make a dark, messed up fantasy story, but also bring the edginess up to the absolute max. The whole thing follows this dude called Ken Kaneki, who starts off as your typical student, but then he has this encounter with a ghoul, which is basically a monster who looks like a regular person, and bam, he becomes a half ghoul, half human. The original series was famous for its psychological depth and these tragic characters that would just make you question your entire life while you were reading. I mean, at some point, this was legit one of the biggest shows out there. Every weeb alive was talking about it. And then just a couple of months after the manga was done, the author decided to give us a sequel called Tokyo Ghoul Re. It picks up 2 years after the original and introduces Kaneki under his new identity, Heisei Sasaki, who lost his memory and is now working for the CCG, who are basically this group of detectives who hunt ghouls. The sequel brings introducing new characters, new factions, and gives us a deeper look at all the political and scientific stuff going on behind the scenes. The story builds up to this final war that's gonna decide what happens to both humans and ghouls. The manga version of the sequel is generally considered a solid continuation. People usually agree that there was a lot of psychological complexity and super messed up but interesting moments. Sure, there were issues, but it was great. Until the anime decided to do something pretty weird. The adaptation of the manga was already pretty bad in the first season, but instead of just continuing to adapt the manga, the anime decided to create its own sequel called Tokyo Ghoul Root A, or Square Root of A as I like to call it. And the name was honestly the least bad thing about it. In Square Root of A, the main character joins the villains for literally no reason. There's no character development, no logic, and just why? People generally hated the sequel, but the worst part is that it kinda messed up the future of the anime. This series had built up this reputation for not caring about adapting the manga. So when Tokyo Ghoul Re came out, no one else cared. The most hilarious part is that the only thing that consistently got praised about this entire mess is the opening theme. That's it. The actual content was so bad that it managed to disappoint both manga fans who knew how good it could have been and anime-only viewers who just wanted to watch something good. Sometimes the original series isn't even that good, so it kind of feels like a sequel couldn't be worse, until it is. The Seven Deadly Sins is a fantasy adventure series that follows these legendary knights called the Seven Deadly Sins. The simplest way I can explain it is that they're this group of overpowered, quirky warriors that go on a journey. It was never the greatest thing ever made. It had epic battles, magical powers, and a big cast of characters. Classic stuff. But as the series went on, everything progressively got worse and worse. Especially the anime, where the animation quality became like embarrassingly bad. But here's the thing. The same author was gonna start working on a new sequel. So maybe with all the time they'd spent writing and learning from their mistakes, they would have improved. Maybe there was still a chance to turn it into something really cool. Four Knights of the Apocalypse takes place years after the Seven Deadly Sins. The author decided to introduce a new group of heroes, and the whole story focuses on this kid called Percival. He finds out that he's one of the four people who are destined to destroy the world. So he goes on a journey, and along the way, he meets a bunch of people who have their own mysterious connection to this prophecy. When this thing dropped, people were kind of confused. On one hand, it actually had some generally good ideas. Some interesting character concepts, solid world building, interesting magic abilities that were pretty cool to look at, and even moments of decent writing. But here's the problem. All those positives got completely overshadowed by some huge issues. According to a lot of fans, the dialogue was absolutely terrible, especially for the female characters. There was still a lot of weird stuff that was already a problem in the original series, and instead of fixing it, they just kinda doubled down on it. It was a mess. Seven Deadly Sins was already this pretty mediocre manga that got absolutely destroyed by a terrible anime. And unfortunately, the sequel just continued being disappointing in a lot of the same ways. There are also times when a sequel can be so bad that people don't even want to accept it's a sequel. Naruto is one of the most beloved and influential anime series ever. Over hundreds of episodes and manga chapters, we watch Naruto's journey from this lonely dude that everyone treats like absolute garbage to a hero that everyone respects. Just so you know, this series wasn't just popular, it became one of the big three alongside Bleach and One Piece. Those are series that literally shaped an entire generation of anime and manga fans. When it ended, everyone knew that there was going to be a sequel, and everyone knew it was going to be a big deal. When it came out, the focus shifted to Naruto's son, Boruto Uzumaki. The world had changed. The ninja village was now this modern city, totally at peace and packed with advanced technology. I mean, there were even aliens. Where Naruto was all about an underdog fighting for respect and overcoming crazy obstacles, Boruto was about living in the shadow of a legend. His problem isn't trying to get noticed, it's trying to escape his dad's legacy. When it first came out, people were not very happy, and as the series kept going on, the criticism just kept piling up. The show was basically sidelining all the original characters that people cared about. The villains were kinda lame, and the story felt uninteresting. But the worst part is that both the manga and the anime had their own unique problems. The manga had a new artist, which meant that it looked completely different from the original Naruto, and that made a lot of fans pretty nasty. The anime, on the other hand, had terrible pacing and was stuffed with filler and anime-only episodes, and they were not good. For a long time, a lot of long-time Naruto fans felt like Boruto completely failed to live up to what came before it. That was until part 2 of Boruto came out. 2 Blue Vortex. This continuation finally made the series feel like it was actually about Boruto. The series fully embraced him as this overpowered character, and he transformed from an obnoxious kid to someone cool. The enemies got better, there was a genuine sense of mystery, and the author's art style, which got absolutely roasted early on, had improved so much while still keeping his own vibe. All the feelings around this series have flipped so much that you rarely hear anyone complaining about the manga anymore, and people are actually starting to acknowledge that Boruto is finally living up to the hype. This incredible comeback, combined with the fact that they finally put the anime on pause because they realized literally no one wanted to watch this garbage, was the perfect storm that brought Boruto to where it is today. The rightful successor to one of the most legendary stories ever created. Luckily, there are also times when a sequel is different, but people still like it. Jujutsu Kaisen is the story of Yuji Itadori, this absolute unit of a high schooler who's just trying to live his life. And then bam, he's thrown into the brutal world of Jujutsu, where he has to fight monsters, sorcerers, and the evil spirit inside of his own body. And listen, for a while there, JJK was genuinely untouchable. The fight scenes were insane, the story was great, and Gege had the guts to actually kill off characters that mattered, which made the story feel way darker than the usual battle series out there. You know, for some reason I often hear people say that JJK was never good, and just, what are you saying, my dude? Listen, I'm not saying this is the most important thing, but this thing was selling like crazy. It won Best Anime of the Year for both of its first seasons, and also became the most sold manga for several years. But then, unfortunately, the author apparently had really bad issues with the production of the manga, which was affecting his work, and everything kind of went sideways. Don't get me wrong, there were a lot of problems in the series itself, but in general, it just kind of felt like he wanted to get over it, which is very understandable. But approximately a year later, he announced a sequel called Modulo. From the beginning, he decided that this manga was going to last 6 months, and that's it. It was written by the original author, but drawn by the artist of Cypher Academy. Instead of happening a couple of years later, like, you know, most sequels, we are 68 years in the future. And now it's all about these aliens who basically showed up to Earth, and humans, yeah, they didn't really want that. The main characters are the grandkids of very important characters from the original JJK. Plus, this alien dude named Maru, love this guy. At first, people were not super happy about this. It's not that there was anything terrible about it, but fans felt like it wasn't as good as they wanted. Everyone knew about what Boruto and other sequels did to the original series, so when they saw aliens at JJK, the fan base felt kinda weird. But then something pretty cool happened. As the chapters went by, the series slowly started becoming better, and people were actually getting hyped for new chapters. Some people were still mad about what happened to the original series, and that anger is definitely transferring into how they're judging Modulo. But the recent chapters, I can't lie, they've been delivering. Better character development, some genuinely cool powers, and the classic JJK missions that made us fall in love with the series in the first place. Sure, the art is different from the original chaotic, sketchy style, but the new author is nailing the horror vibes and also the Jujutsu Kaisen style, while still doing his own thing. And unlike Boruto, it seems like people have mostly enjoyed this new look from the beginning. If a sequel is supposed to create something new, something different, that's still part of the same world, then it's great so far. It's going to be pretty short, so it won't necessarily have the impact Boruto had, for example, but it's going in a very good direction, I would say. We are so way too early to call this a success, but between Modulo doing its thing and season 3 of the anime, hopefully the legacy of this series will improve beyond, you know, the controversial ending of the manga and the crazy production of season 2. Finally, sometimes a sequel is way more than just a sequel. Dragon Ball is probably the most famous anime and manga series of all time. Even if you've somehow never seen a single episode, you've almost 100% seen this guy before. The original story followed Goku's journey when he was a super strong little kid. Then Dragon Ball Z came along and took the whole thing to this little cosmic level. Goku became an adult and had to defend Earth and the entire freaking universe from increasingly uglier aliens. The series became popular for its battles that kept getting more insane. All these transformations that looked extremely cool, and most importantly, the characters. By the end of Dragon Ball Z, the story wrapped up, and for a lot of fans, this was the absolute perfect ending. But then, they decided to create Dragon Ball GT. The sequel was based on Akira Toriyama's manga, but it wasn't actually part of the official story, kind of like filler. The whole idea was to bring Dragon Ball back to its roots. You know, more adventure stuff instead of just fighting and powering up like in Z. They turned Goku into a kid again, thinking it would appeal to younger viewers. And trust me when I say that Dragon Ball GT got absolutely bodied by fans. People hated the inconsistent tone, how beloved characters like Vegeta and Gohan became side characters, and the new villains were honestly nowhere near as cool or threatening as the ones from Z. And ultimately, turning Goku back into a kid was a decent idea, but here it felt like a mistake. For most fans, GT is remembered as a total mess, a sequel that completely failed to capture what made the earlier shows so good. But that's not where the story ends, because then Dragon Ball Super showed up, and that was a real sequel. This story was the official continuation of Dragon Ball Z, with Akira Toriyama back in charge. He picks up right after the original story, brings back all the important characters, but quickly makes the universe way bigger with new overpowered enemies, multiverse tournaments, and crazy new transformations like Super Saiyan Blue and even Ultra Instinct. While it did in fact start as one of the most controversial Dragon Ball series of all time, especially the anime that had some moments of, truly awful animation, it slowly got better and delivered some genuinely amazing arcs. Fans still agree that the good parts don't really make up for all the terrible stuff throughout, but what they do agree on is that Dragon Ball Super got people incredibly hyped and managed to recapture some of that Z magic. Once the series found its thing, it became this massive hit. Super kind of brought the franchise back to life, pulling in a whole new generation of fans and getting longtime viewers excited again. Combined with some absolutely banging movies like Broly and Superhero, the series became bigger than it was in a long while. People pretty much thought this was gonna be it for a while, until we received news that Toriyama had created Daima, a new Dragon Ball anime in which he would be very strongly involved. People were extremely hyped and ready to enjoy this show, until a few months after the announcement, fans around the world were hit with tragic news. Approximately a year after the announcement, we got the first episode of Daima. It was set in between Dragon Ball Z and Super. The main characters got turned into kids, kinda like GT, which sends them on this new adventure across worlds they've never seen before. Since it came out, people have had really complicated feelings about this sequel. Fans praise it for actually making the child transformation make sense. The awesome world building, dialogue that felt authentic, really good animation, and some great fights. But they also criticized it for having no real tension, disappointing villains, terrible pacing issues, plot threads that just got dropped, and this overall feeling that this was kind of a rough draft. But despite all these problems, people still appreciated it as Akira Toriyama's final creative work. Even though the sequels never quite managed to reach the legendary status of the original series, they still managed to bring back some of the magic. Daima made many fans emotional, not just because of what they got, but because of everything that could have been, making it both a magical and tragic goodbye from one of the most legendary creators in history.